please. Oh, Kevin's not here yet. Let's still go. All right. Thought he was here for some reason. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. Tonight we have our new town manager, Melissa, who's here to join us, and Lynn is here as well to present the 5-year forecast and then the capital improvement plan. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. All right. Well, we're going to start. We'll start. We have public comment. I don't know if anyone's going to comment now before we begin. All right. Then we'll jump right in.
Thank you, Melissa Rodriguez, town manager. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me. If you don't mind, I'll start with the financial forecast. Okay.
Yeah, whatever's better for you.
Great, thank you. So typically when I do this, I like to start talking a little bit just about and reviewing with everyone the financial condition of the town. I tend to present things in a very layperson-friendly way, so it may be more rudimentary than what you're used to, but I try to remember the people at home are watching too, and it's important for us all to understand. So just a little bit about the financial condition. We continue to maintain our AAA bond rating, and that rating really reflects the strong economy that we have here in town, our strong financial management policies, and our strong budgetary performances. In 2018, we received both the Certificate of Achievement for our financial reporting as well as the Distinguished Budget Award. I anticipate we'll receive them again in 2019, but they have not been rewarded yet. For our reserves, the stabilization fund, and so these balances kind of do change for at least the stabilization funds and the OPEB trust kind of daily because of interest, but I try to draw a line in the sand to give it to you. So the stabilization fund is $5,061,000. Our capital stabilization fund is $602,228. Our special education stabilization fund is $751,954. Free cash was certified last month at $12,441,091, and our OPEB trust is $4,196,066. And there's a little bit about what forecasting is and why we do it. So it's a very useful management tool and helps us a lot in making policy, and it enables us to evaluate and make choices moving forward. So we're not just looking at things in that one year, but we're looking at things more holistically and globally when we're trying to make important policy decisions and operational decisions. It can serve as an early warning system, helps detect gaps between our revenues and expenditures in the future, but it doesn't insulate us from potential surprises, right? Things happen that we cannot always understand or know in advance, but allows us to plan for and consider those, and that's important. So it's important to keep doing these every year as we move forward. It's comprised of educated estimates, so it's based on past expenditures and revenues. We talk with staff when we do these. We talk about what building permits have come in, what the assessments look like for the year. We encompass a really short period of time, so usually 3 years to 5 years. Here we typically do a 5-year one. It's not detailed like a budget. It's really a summary of what we're looking at, and it's always conservative, right? So we're not going to put things in there that could be, maybe, could be, would be, right? We want to put things in there that we know about, and so we're really careful to do that. Bond rating agencies look very favorably on communities that do a forecast in this way. So we have 4 major categories of revenues. I say 5 because we talk about real estate and personal property taxes, but it's really 4. And our revenue projections really identify the funds that we have available for the budget in the following year. So as you know, here we start early, meeting with our committee and determining what our revenues look like. We look internally for trends and anomalies. What's different this year? What has grown? Have we seen it grown just this year? Has it grown every year in order to know what we should budget moving forward? And I just try to tell people we're forecasting, so these are early estimates, right? So we can't really rely on them in year 5. Things could change dramatically. Excise tax could go down a lot because people stop buying cars. We could hit a recession. Formulas could change for local aid. But it helps us to look forward when we do these so that we really can understand where we're going. So I'm going to get into each one of these categories. And like I said, it is basic and it gets down probably maybe differently than what you're used to, but it's how I like to do it. So if you have other questions or suggestions, I'm always open to them. So our biggest revenue source is our real estate and property taxes. They account for 76% of the revenues received annually. It's the largest portion of our revenue. It's the amount a community raises through property tax, and it can be any amount up to the levy limit. The levy can be any amount up to the levy limit. It raises 2.5 annually per Proposition 2.5, but it can rise through other mechanisms, debt and capital exclusions, which are temporary increases to the tax levy, an override, which is a permanent increase to the tax levy, and then new growth. And new growth is the taxes that come from new construction, and that's also added permanently to the tax levy. We typically project new growth at about $650,000 a year. This year, we're projecting it at $700,000. The next category is intergovernmental revenue. That comprises about 11% of all of our revenues received. That's Chapter 70, unrestricted general government aid, veterans benefits, and that really varies from year to year. Chapter 70, as you know, is our school aid. Veterans benefits receive 75% reimbursement from the state. Unrestricted includes things like state-owned land. We are estimating this to increase by 2% this year with similar adjustments in further years. For local receipts, that's also around 11% annually. That's our local fees, fines, permits, and other charges. So motor vehicle, meals and lodgings tax, any pilots we have, penalties, licenses, fees, host community fees, building permits, anything that really comes into the town as a fee or fine. That's anticipated to increase 3% for fiscal year 21. We have 1 host community fee and 2 pilots currently. This also includes our receipts from ambulances. And the last one is our operating transfers and other revenue, and that's obviously a very small amount of our income, but it's comprised of actual revenue received, so it's mostly our indirect costs from our enterprise funds. So if we have health insurance that's paid through the enterprise funds, it gets transferred over to the general fund, and that's what makes up that 2%. It's just a chart showing what those revenues look like. And you can see it really is taxes, and a big portion of that is residential. So then we work on projecting our revenues. And like I said before, and I'll keep saying it, right? This is really early on, but we're really seeing approximately 3% per year. And that's, pretty typical for a town like this, right? We see the 2.5% and that small amount, that new growth that we're getting, and that's how we get to that 3% number. And so we move forward with that 3% every year. And, I don't think that's even a little bit unusual for a community of our size or of our nature. And what we do next is we forecast the potential expenses. So it includes everything, right? The whole town. But what we do is we think about things like that we already know. So we talk about fixed costs, right? What can we move forward that we already have signed, right? We know how much typically our insurance is going to be. We can see, looking back, that it increases by about 8% every year. We already have signed contracts with our collective bargaining agreement, so we know what those look like, right? We've planned for those because we forecasted already. So we knew when we negotiated them what we would be able to afford and how we can move forward. Any step increases that we have, any contracts for services. So for instance, we know of a 3-year deal with Munis, right? We're gonna forecast Munis for 3 years because we know what that cost. We have exact cost for those. Or we have janitorial services that we'll build into this forecast knowing. Any need for increased services that are happening either due to changes in the population, changes in demographics, new priorities, or state or federal mandates and bylaw changes. So let's say, for instance, the town passes the bag law, right, the bag ban, and we know we have to do enforcement for it, and we know that that's going to require a .25 health inspector. If we knew that that had already been passed, we would put that .25 health inspector in that budget, knowing that it's coming forward in the forecast. And while things do remain relatively stable, right, we know that things do change. And so we strive to remain conservative in the budget increases so that we can provide top-notch services while kind of preparing for those changes too. So this is our expenditure forecast. So basically what you're seeing here is health insurance increasing by about 6% a year this year and 7% in future years. Other personnel benefits, about 8% per year, and the primary driver of that is really our pension appropriation, which I'll show you in a minute. General government increasing 2%, the schools increasing by 3.6%, DPW by 3%, public safety by 3%. Debt is actual debt plus the estimates from the CIP, so those are all kind of embedded in there, which is helpful to see as you're moving through this. But we try to encompass as many of the costs and changes as we can. So this is a kind of idea of what our estimated retirement appropriation looks like through 28. This is a good one that we can kind of know what it's going to look like. So fiscal year 21 was 7.5%, fiscal year 22 is 8. It continues to be 8 until around fiscal year 25, where it drops down to a 4% increase. And so it continues to increase. And we done funding in 35. So we didn't go out. A lot of communities did and went out to like 42. We didn't. So we're at that point have some capacity in the budget because we'll be done funding this. And usually the recommendation I make is that you tip that over to OPEB. But that's a while So it's a long ways away. Time goes fast, as we all know. This is a chart just showing the expenditures. So you can see the schools are around 50% of the budget. The health insurance, which is the red group health, that includes both the schools and the town's health insurance. So that's really more of a split with a little bit more on the school side. Public Works is around 5% of the total budget, public safety being around 11%. And then this is the 5-year financial forecast showing the revenues and expenditures. So Lynn will tell you, this is unusual for me. I usually don't, I was very nervous about showing the deficit, but it kind of is what it is, and it's something we'll work towards. So for fiscal year 21, the budget we're working on now, you can see that we're already showing a deficit of $760,000 based on our forecast of revenues and expenditures. So we'll be working as we're going through our budget season on getting rid of that gap, and we will, no doubt. We will bring you a balanced budget. It will be work on our end. It's always kind of a fun, it's fun for me because I'm a municipal nerd. Other people probably don't find it fun, but we'll work towards that, and we'll bridge that gap. And then in future years, we may have new growth, we may have cost-saving initiatives. We'll do what we can to bridge the gap and not have that come forward. And that's that.
Thank you.
No problem. And I'm happy to answer whatever I can.
Just,
Go.
Tim, you had a question?
Real quick, do you recall last year's gap for the 20 budget?
Who you started?
I don't off the top of my head.
Yeah,
I can get you that
curious.
information. I know we do have a gap typically every year.
And one more follow-up question is I know there's a big deal going down at the end of the road here. I don't think those numbers, those revenues from that big deal down at the end of the road are even considered in any of this. What kind of upside might there be?
So we don't include anything that's not permitted, right? Because it's a huge risk for us to do that.
How-
And so even like something like Minko, right, that has already been through the planning board, right, and is a very realistic happening, right, but hasn't received its building permits yet, won't be reflected here, right? And so something like Amazon, which I think coming online probably wouldn't be for at least 3 years, we certainly wouldn't consider. However, it certainly would help bridge that gap. At this point, it would be really difficult for us to tell you what that taxes would look like because we do not have building permits. We don't know the value of construction. So
We keep asking for
Yeah.
it, but we haven't got it yet.
we're getting there, slowly but surely.
Anyone else have any questions?
So I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, I'm wondering, and we have this discussion, of course, every year, but, my biggest concern is always my big driver is, it's not so much the next year, because that's, pretty clear what that's gonna look like. It's what are the decisions we make today which hurt us in 10 years, and then it's too late. So, when I look at the next 5 years forecast, and I'm just going off, so you're assuming like a revenue increase of 22 million from today to in the next 5 years, roughly. And alone 8 million of that is going through healthcare and benefits. So it's almost 40% of our assumed growth of revenue is going straight to, non-service related accounts. And next 5 years, a recession could be in the books. That's not so out of the. I mean, we're now 10. We're going into the 12th year. Eventually, things are coming down. Normally, it's just the longest cycle of, I think, for a long time. So, if we assume that 20 million is only 15 million, 8 million of that will stay and will go to healthcare and the pension. That's not, we cannot really reduce that. Or maybe they redo the pension, obligation. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. So what are our contingency planning in the next 5 years? I mean, I'm not expecting that you come up with numbers, but is this something you also think about, hey, if that 22 million is only 50 million in the next 5 years, but we know 8 million goes towards healthcare and pension, what we do then? What are we going to do with services? The annual 3-year % increase is not possible, you know, so, or with, you know, with reduced services maybe. So, I mean, how is the game plan, you know, when you look at these 5-year projections?
I mean, to be honest with you, I think I'm working from a little bit of a deficit at this point, because we're just starting, and I don't mean the budget, I mean myself, because we're just starting our budget, and typically for me in my first year anywhere, so I've been here 3 months now, my first year anywhere, the budget season is really a way for me to learn about the town the most, right? Because I meet with each department head, I ask a million probably annoying questions about their budget and try to really understand where we can see cost savings. So I would anticipate that over the next year, we'll start finding places that maybe we can regionalize or maybe we can see savings. And I think we've already started to kind of explore a lot of those, Lynn and I. So I'm excited about getting started with this budget season and then kind of seeing what next year's 5-year financial forecast looks like, because I think that we can make real progress in seeing savings and in figuring out creative ways to do things that are just different from how we do them now. Not that how we do them now is bad, but fresh set of eyes is always, I think, a positive thing. So my first year in my last community, I was able to increase the budget very little because there was places where I could move things around, or I was like, wait, we could see a cost savings here by doing this. And I think, I anticipate that we may see some of that this time. That being said, I think that we have an exceptionally lean staff, both on the schools and the town side. So, you know, it would be easier if we could say, you know, we have 5 extra assistants. We don't, right? I mean, it's surprisingly lean. So we're gonna have to be creative in other ways, right? And whether that's negotiating the best possible contracts, figuring out ways to get pilots with people who aren't paying pilots right now, finding new and creative revenue streams, I think are gonna be the way that we're really gonna have to tackle a lot of these issues. For health insurance, we're already in the GIC, and our contribution rate is already, I think, really high. And so I think if we make any other changes on that end, we're really gonna risk attracting good employees, and I would hate to see that. I'm on the GIC commission, and so I see kind of what they're doing and whether or not we'll be able to see any future cost savings through there. But I think that since we joined the GIC, are we seeing $11 million in savings? Is that what we've, yeah. So I mean, that's pretty significant already.
We're still,
Right, and
we're benefiting from it
Yeah.
still now.
The town should be applauded for that, because I think that was probably very a tough struggle. But you know, we're going to continue to look for ways to see savings and figure out kind of creative new ways to do things. So I hope next year it's a different conversation where I could say, here's what we've done, right? Because we're trying to bridge that gap, and we recognize that we're not going to be in this boom forever, right? We're just not, and so we need to figure out ways to be sustainable. And so we're going to be working on that this year.
The GIC benchmark themselves against, I mean, 7% sounds okay, but healthcare spending hasn't been going up for 10 years. It's been right about that. Do they compare themselves to Maine and New Hampshire?
They do.
Is there a performance indicator that their dashboard?
I could pull that together and send that to you. It's interesting. So they benchmark themselves against other large buyers in Massachusetts, actually. They're one of the largest buyers, because they not only have all the municipalities but also the state employees. And so they get that kind of buying power, which I think is a really positive thing for us. The negative thing for us is that we lose a lot of control, right? We don't have any control over the budget anymore, which we used to have when we had the trust fund, right? It was easier for us to kind of maneuver things and understand things, and now we're really at their will. But I think that it's a positive thing, because they have this positive purchasing power. So I'm happy to not only I can pull together for you not only the health insurance rates and the comparable rates for the nonprofit and the private world, but also the prescription rates, because that's something that they've really been tackling this year
Right.
on the GIC side.
What prompted my question was Blue Cross of Mass had a press release about some value-based program they were running that was coming in at 4% or something, quite a bit lower than 7%. And I imagine a lot of our employees are in Blue Cross. I just always wonder how that money flows.
It's interesting. So last year, I went out to bid for my health insurance in my last community, just because I was curious to see what would happen.
Is a self-insured employer, or is it part of a GIC?
So we were part of GIC, but I felt like it was my duty to go out to bid and see if it would make more sense for us to go self-insured. Because if you remember correctly, last year the GIC had some hiccups. So I did, and not to my surprise, Blue Cross Blue Shield and Harvard Pilgrim both didn't bid because they already had our business with the GIC.
They wanted
The
to
only
bid
bid
against
we
themselves.
yeah. So
Yeah.
the only bid we had was Maya, and it was over $1 million more than it would be to stay in the GIC, that's what we opted to do. You know, that's something we certainly could explore. We could go out to bid next time we come up. I think we just signed a deal, right? So we've got 3 years to go, 2.5 years to go. It doesn't hurt to do that. I think it's a positive thing to go out there and see what else is out there. I would encourage it, right?
Do you have a benefit, consultant that does this for you? Do you do
So-
traditional Massachusetts RFPs or?
No,
North
when
Andover
I,
RFPs?
yeah, so when I went out to bid, I used a benefit consultant.
Okay.
It just, it makes more sense.
No, I think it does.
Yeah, and
It's a
so
big
I've
output.
always used Cook and Company.
Yep.
We use Cook and Company here too, so I'm still learning. But yeah, so I mean, I think it makes much more sense. They have all those relationships.
Right.
So,
Well, thanks.
no problem.
What was the assumed interest rate for the debt service
3.5.
for the next 5 years?
That's right.
Well, we have good bond rating,
No, well,
AAA, so, and based on what we're probably gonna be borrowing over the next 5 years, based on the 5-year plan, it would be at the 3.5.
I mean, there's a bit of a risk that it puts more pressure on
It would.
to the fixed cost, which
It
you know,
would.
goes
It would
against.
definitely, yep.
And also, I don't know if I ever asked that, so looking at the 5-year outlook, do you put any additional money into the stabilization fund in all these reserves?
this is
So it's normally,
This is outside of all of that.
right,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
We do this only, as we go. If in a year there's money, we put it in there.
Correct.
But you're not planning that in the next 5 years that
Not
those funds are increasing, so they,
Not
They
from the
assu-
operating.
Not
I mean,
from the
we
operating.
would still make the transfers to stay at the policy amount that's set through free cash, which is what you've done historically.
Yeah.
But within the operating, we would not be making any transfers to any type
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
stabilizations. And we don't consider free cash as a revenue source in any of this because it's obviously not sustaining. So.
we should not forget that the good times will be over
Mhm.
eventually.
Yeah.
And they
Right.
might be in those 5 years, It's always easier when it goes up,
I will say the town has done a wonderful job of building up their reserves, and I think that, having the policies and sticking to them really shows a lot about town meeting and the respect they have for our finances, which is good, so.
Any more questions about 5-year forecast? Do you want to just go right into the
Yeah, why
capital
not?
improvement plan? All right.
All right, so next we're gonna talk about our capital improvement plan, and it has the old date on it, sorry. So again, I'm gonna get into the basics of what a capital improvement plan is and how we do it, but it's helpful for a reminder if anyone might be new, so. So what is a capital improvement plan? What do we define it as? So it's our capital items. It's typically our tangible assets, our projects that cost more than $25,000 and that have a minimal useful lifespan of 5 years. It provides a planning schedule and defines our financing options. As a policy, we do try to fund projects of less than $50,000 within the capital budget, and we are continuing to do that this year. And the capital budget is the upcoming year spending plan for capital items that's presented to town meeting for approval. So there's 2 things you're really looking at, right? You're looking at the capital plan and the capital budget, but they're all encompassed in this one document. So again, it's a 5-year planning tool, allows us to plan for future needs. The process is that the department heads and the schools submit and prioritize their requests. The town manager and Lynn evaluate those requests, and then we had a group meeting this year, which was a little different than how we've done things in the past, to discuss the requests, the concerns, and the funding mechanisms. I think that's very helpful. It helps everybody else to know what everyone else's needs are, but additionally, it brings up things, sometimes we forget that everything we do affects every other department. And so we might have a plan on here that somebody else might be thinking about doing in 3 years, and can we see cost savings by bringing things together? And so we had this kind of group meetings where we brainstormed, talked about our requests, and really kind of flushed them all out. So what you're gonna see is 35 projects in 9 categories over 5 years. And then there's 2 additional categories outside of those, which are the Facilities Master Plan 1 and the Facilities Master Plan 2. I should tell you, this is a fluid document, right? It changes. New projects may require more immediate attention. So we may have something that will come on the capital plan that hasn't been on there because a roof failed or an AC unit suddenly went and it's outside of warranty, but it was way before we thought it was going to happen. And that it does happen. So I always get nervous when I put these out because everyone's like, well, it wasn't in the capital plan. And sometimes things happen that we just can't plan for, just like at home. So the Facilities Master Plan 1 and 2, like I said, they're not included. The Facilities Master Plan 2 bids were just opened. We're just doing the interviews. They did one interview yesterday. I think they have another one on Thursday. They're evaluating the bids, and the numbers that are in here right now are really just placeholders as they move toward the finalization of that plan, which is really important. So the total over 5 years is $36 million estimated, with 26 million of that funding coming from the town. So it's a total of fiscal year 21 is 6,516,000 with 19 projects. So these are the projects for fiscal year 21. They're mostly smaller projects with only 2 over $1 million. The road work that you're seeing is offset by Chapter 90. So when I say that only a certain amount of it is coming from the town, it's because we're getting grants, or we get money from the state, or we're requesting funds from a different source. And the Facilities Master Plan 1 is also over $1 million, and that's a placeholder. We wait for the bids to come in for the senior center project. So those bids are due in February, and we anticipate that we may need additional funds for that. The original appropriation was based on an estimate from the 2011 Facilities Master Plan, and it didn't contain any escalator for, well, you know. So we are attempting to, we have that out to bid because we need to account for inflation. And things like steel, et cetera, have increased beyond even what inflation is. So we have a cost estimate that is more than the original appropriation. What we did was we put it out to bid, and my hope is that when it comes back in February, we'll have a warrant article placeholder on, and I'll be able to amend that article to actually reflect what that increase is. I like to do things a little bit differently and try to get those bids in advance so that we know we're appropriating a real amount. It's not always easy to do, and I also wanted to bid it over the winter because I think we get more competitive prices over the winter. So that's what we did. Fingers crossed that works. In Facilities Master Plan 2, one thing that we did put in the bid specs, we requested a funding schedule for the projects in the Facilities Master Plan 2, but we also asked them to do a funding schedule with inflation built in as well, so we won't see this problem or issue again. And I think that's really important. So most of these projects are really routine this year, as you're seeing, no really major capital initiatives, really kind of routine maintenance projects. Yeah, of course. I'm happy,
Or do you want,
yes.
okay, whatever's.
Yeah, whatever works
So
for you.
for the Facilities Master Plan Phase 1, you mentioned this is a placeholder because you're out to bid for the senior
Right.
center. So do you think that this number is accurate based on
So this number's based on the cost estimate we got from the architect.
previously? So it's gonna be
Yes.
the additional,
But what we're doing right now is we're trying to value engineer, and we've created some things that are alternates. And alternates are always dangerous because when you create, I don't know how many of you have done RFPs, but when you create an alternate, they're ranked and you have to take them in that order. So right now, we're really working on figuring out what alternates are gonna be our priorities, right? So I hope that it comes in under this amount, but I wanna make sure I have it in there at what I think is the worst possible.
okay, that was kind of my question. So we don't think it'll be much,
I hope
hopefully.
not. I hope
Okay.
not. Right, I mean, we've got a really good architect, we have a good OPM, the bid documents are tight. We've had, I think, 6 bidders that have taken the documents and have submitted their paperwork. Bids aren't in yet, but there's a lot of work they have to
Yep.
do when they're doing a project through GovCAM. And that's a lot, so I think it will be competitive. So I'm excited about it, but, my analysis is typically that senior center projects cost between $450 to $650 a square foot. And, this project will probably come in line with that, and that will require more than what we have funded right now.
Okay.
So this is a copy of the 5-year plan, and just kind of, I know it's small, it just gives you an idea. I believe you all have a book, right? So it just gives you an idea of what it has moving forward. Like I said, it is subject to change. We did do something a little differently this year than we've done in the past. I like it when all of the projects are on the chart. So even if there's, like, for instance, the historic entrance stairs at Stevens Memorial Library, we're going to put a CPC application in for that. But I think everything should be reflected, no matter what the funding source is, so people really understand what we're doing in capital in the town per year. And so to piecemeal it doesn't really work for me. I want everyone to see what we're doing. For fiscal year 21 funding plan, we are asking to use free cash for the funding of this plan. So we're asking for $5 million in free cash. Chapter 90 will cover $820,000, and then CPC applications will total $500,000. Like I said, those aren't guaranteed, but that's our funding plan at this point. We're advising against using debt this year. We have the cash on hand, and since the Facilities Master Plan 2 is currently being created, not even to that point yet, we feel like we really need to reserve the debt for the future years. So as you know, we have a policy that our debt will be 5% of the operating budget. In order to stay at that, we would need to pay for this year out of free cash. Over the last 4 years, we've really been turning back free cash, so we haven't really been generating. I know everyone It's like, oh, we have $12 million of free cash. It's not like we're generating that money every year, right? We've been turning it back and turning it back and turning it back. And so that's our recommendation this year, is that we use $5 million from free cash. If anyone has any questions, I can stop there before I go into the other capital plans, or I can just keep going. We have enterprise fund ones.
Alice, it's more of a question because you don't have a legacy. Lynn, when I look at the 5-year plan, last year, this year, I don't look out beyond maybe year 2.
Yep.
But still, I still look at year 2. And when I looked at the last year plan, the senior center was not in last year's plan of $2.5 million.
It was not, because we did not know at that time, because we didn't have any bids in, we weren't even at a construction stage, that everybody was assuming that the money that we had originally appropriated, which had no inflation costs associated with it, was a 6-year-old number that we had put into the plan previously, was gonna be enough, until we got the report from the architect as to what he felt the costs were gonna be. So it was not in there. You're right.
So last year, was budgeted for $750. Did we spend any money last year? Maybe last year, be current year, 2020.
That we have not spent any money on the senior center other than minimal amounts.
Okay.
Yep, so that money, that $750 was to replenish the facilities master plan money that we used to help with the kindergarten. So we had to replenish and put that back, and to get it back to the level that we originally had hoped the senior center was gonna cost. And then when the architect gave us his report, it did not reflect the available funds that we had.
Huge. Which really leads me to, we voted as a town on last year's capital improvement plan. I was seeing things that looks like, for example, the police carport that is now in 2021's plan. So what did or did not get done for 2020 that we ought to be looking at?
It's the exact same issue. So that also was under budgeted at last town meeting. And now that we have a better cost estimate and it's currently out to design, it's apparent that that's not going to be enough money. So moving forward, the lessons learned is that we need to account for inflation, and we need to get at least preliminary schematic designs done with cost estimates for projects before they go to town meeting.
Yeah, this is more than inflation though, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that it's hard, right? You have, in my opinion, this is how I would typically do things. One, we either get really good cost estimates, or you look and you see, like, Bedford just built an 8-car port and it costs this. And this place just built a 5-car port and it costs this. And you try to get those prices and you try to extrapolate. It's always really easy to look back at the last town meeting and say, oh, why did we do it that way, right? So all we can do is try to do it better, or how we think it's best moving forward. I don't like to come back to town meeting and ask for more money for any projects. I don't think it's not a good look for us, and we certainly don't want to do it moving forward. And so,
Can we spend any money at all on the carport?
yes, it's out to design.
Oh, I gotta know when to get yes.
Yeah, well,
Well,
we have bidded right now,
for-
yeah.
We've paid for bid, but we haven't, any construction,
No work.
nothing, because you can't do the construction unless you have all the funding.
So right now, for the carport, we just did an RFQ. We had 2 bidders who responded, and we're negotiating a price with one of them to do the design.
So it's, we spent all the CIP budgeted last year?
For every project that was.
No, we made a sort of, will we have spent all the CIP, I guess, for this year that we
Not
approved
100%,
the town?
because it's cyclical, you have to,
Right.
it depends on the weather and
Good
things
point.
like that, so, yeah. It usually, when we bond capital projects, we have 24 months to pay, to use it, so 2 years basically, or else
So
we have
already
taxes.
bonded all that money that we?
we will bond some of it, depending on what we've used. I'll do that in May, but I'm not gonna bond it if we haven't used it. Yep, it'll get bonded when we start using it the following year. Because typically we pay for the prior year's capital out of our cash, and then we bond it before the end of the fiscal year to replenish it. Yep.
I have two questions.
First, so far the facility master plan before the senior center, we're always spot on. We always did a well job. I think we spent 20 million and we had never an overrun. You know, when you go through all these, why is the senior center such a dragged on overspending? I mean, why that project suddenly not performing like the other we had before?
Well, the previous years, you had some projects that were under budget, some projects that really were over budget, but they were all voted as a facilities master plan, and some of the money, when whatever was left over in one project was able to be used for this project, and it was managed, okay, throughout. Might have had some surpluses, other capital projects that got transferred in there at town meeting, things like that. The senior center, again, was a 6-year-old price that was put in the capital plan and never changed. So you have 6 years ago, you planned to build a senior center, then the senior center got changed, got moved on the property, we ended up getting another piece of property that we're gonna have to fund, for the parking lot. It was never changed, the prices were never changed. You can't take something that you planned 6 years ago and pay for it today and think it's gonna cost the same amount of money. It's impossible, you can't do it. And the issues now is the cost of inflation, as well as the tariffs that have been put in place, have increased the cost of steel and other products. We're not building a senior center that is extremely extravagant. It's the going rate to build a senior center, and we should have, over the years, as we were building the capital plan, each year increased each one of those years by an inflation cost, and the outer years by a higher amount, because by the time the 5th year comes to the fruition, you've got 5 years difference. Yes, that's all we can do, yeah.
The other question is, so I understand that we want to reserve some debt capacity for the future, but now the interest rates are probably the lowest they will be for a long time. So why would we skip this year where we still could, benefit of a very low interest environment, and when we actually maybe raise in 2 or 3 years, it might actually be, I don't know, might be even lower, but, so I don't know,
Well, I think the net effect here is, okay, so you're gonna get interest for the money sitting in the bank versus the interest that you're potentially gonna pay. It's gonna end up most likely being a wash, because if we're in the outer years and the interest rates are gonna go up, our interest income is gonna go down, because they're not gonna be paying the higher interest rate to us
so
at
what are
that
we making
point, so.
interest income right now? So what is our average? So
Um,
if
we're-
it's higher than 3.5, we should,
It is
leave
right
it
now.
where it is and
Right.
finance.
But we're not gonna be eating into any of that cash that we're gaining the interest from.
Hmm.
The cash that we're getting the interest from is the operating interest. We're not, the free cash is gaining interest, but that's a small portion of our, $60 million that we have in cash right now. So,
We cannot sweep it every day into interest bearing account and
we
then
can
sweep
do,
it back the
we are
next
doing
time.
very well. I have to say that the treasurer collector's office is doing very well, and our interest income has dramatically increased. But I've seen that happen before, where we've had several good years of great interest income, and then you go back down to where we were only budgeting $100,000, and we're barely making it. So, I think it's beneficial for us to, if we have the funds to cover the debt, so that when the larger projects come in place, that get borrowed out for, a longer period of time. And if we continue to keep the AAA, which we intend to, and we will be very competitive and get really good rates.
Even using this $5 million in free cash, right, we still leave $6 million on the table.
To
and
accumulate.
Right, accumulating, and we typically will generate another probably $2 million next year, so it's not like it's
Going away.
going away, right.
For the facility master plan too, you already put in Franklin School in 22, and then, so is this set in stone, or this is a first placeholder, could change around, or?
Just a placeholder, right, so those are the projects that are anticipated to be included in the facilities master plan too. Those projects could dramatically change as they move forward and talk about space needs, especially on the school side, but right now they're just placeholders. Just
So-
letting people know these are what's coming forward.
I have some questions about facilities master plan too, but
Okay.
maybe we should, do you wanna walk through the rest of your presentation?
Sure,
And then
that's fine.
our questions, we can kind of all
Yeah.
talk about that at the end, if that works?
Sure. So, we have separate capital improvement plans for our enterprise funds. I know you all know what enterprise funds are, so I won't get into that. We have a water enterprise fund, and we have a 5-year plan for that as well. This year, we're planning on using $2 million from our retained earnings to fund these projects, the big one being the backwash tank extension. So the retained earnings in enterprise fund is really like the enterprise fund is free cash, right? It's excess revenue that exists and is kept over the years, just like free cash is. Our certified retained earnings for our water enterprise fund are $4,804,980, so we'll still have a significant amount of money left there as well. For our sewer CIP, we're asking to spend $500,000 on improvements for our sewer stations and our sewer collection systems. Again, the plan is to use retained earnings, and our retained earnings for this account are $4,945,542. We are not anticipating that these changes will require any increases to rates. The Stevens Estate CIP, the current plan is $138,600. 2 of those are going to be CPC applications. That's the restoration of the David Nail painting, which is the one as you go up the stairs, and the second one being the gas and electric lighting. Interestingly, on that one, I guess when in that era when they converted to electric, they thought electric was actually going to be a fad, so everyone left half gas and half electric in their outlets and facilities. So it's interesting. I thought it was. So they're going to be removing the gas and going to all electric, because I'm pretty sure we can stand with the electric at this point. So we're going to have CPC applications for those second 2. The main house and bathroom improvements would be a request from retained earnings if there is retained earnings at the end of the year. We're working on that now. That request may end up not moving forward at town meeting, but we want to make sure we have it on there. And that's it.
Could I ask a couple nitpicky?
Yeah?
I'll do my best.
All right. So we took up municipal IT budget that was traditionally $50,000 a year.
Mhm.
And then the logic is that we can spend our operating expenses on that. Use operating funds rather for the capital, that part of it.
Yeah, so the under 50, over 50, is that what you mean?
It was prior to, it was a flat 50, but it looks like a move was made to say, hey, let's just expense all of this stuff.
Which, you didn't remove it, you're saying we removed it?
Municipal IT?
It's here, it's the top, it's
Is
the
it?
first one.
Yeah, first one.
My bad.
That's okay.
What's the playground master plan?
So that's we have a 5-year plan for playgrounds. I'm just gonna pull it up. Hold on one second. I think it's my last one, right? Like I think this might be one of the last projects.
It's page 87.
Yep, so, we are on the last one, right? And we're gonna be doing the playground at Stevens Pond and the Alpine Field. And it looks like a plan was created, and I think it started in fiscal year 16, that they sent a request, from CPC playground funding each year. And they've already done several of them, and I think they're getting towards the end, from what I understand.
So looks like we went out of the original order. So is Atkinson already what got replaced as part of the new playground's great.
Mhm.
So now we're skipping, and then after that's still just Thompson's left, and that's it. ECC's already done, right?
Mhm.
So it's just Thompson. Okay. Awesome.
In details, I didn't know that a ladder truck or whatever it is costs $1.3 million.
Yes. Ladder trucks are
They're
probably,
big.
yeah, one of our biggest expenditures, and they're built to spec, so, it can be really quite expensive.
Whoa.
No, we'll be careful about
What's
that.
the insurance on that? You know, I don't want to drive that thing into
Yeah.
the ground.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be responsible.
Just how important the specs are? Andover had to return theirs because it couldn't fit underneath one of their bridges.
Well, that was
Amazing.
bad planning.
They found that out afterwards.
The hard one, yeah.
How do
I mean, I've seen communities that haven't been able to get them into their bays when they get them back. You have to be very careful about your
Well-
specifications when you put them together, so.
I mean, we had troubles because we couldn't put it in town hall when the fire
Yeah.
station was there because it was too heavy.
Happens a lot, so I can see that, I mean,
It was
they're,
too heavy.
so, we're very careful when we put the specifications together, and the chief and one of the firefighters usually go out to the facility in Ohio to inspect it before we accept it, so.
Ask you a question. I saw we were purchasing an ambulance as well,
Mhm.
also a big dollar event. Just, how does the system work? Like, if somebody gets in an accident or somebody dials 911, what's the role of private ambulances versus municipal ambulances? Like, how do,
So if you call 911 in North Andover, it is a municipal ambulance that is responding.
okay?
Communities do it in two separate ways. Some communities outsource their ambulance. We have always historically, I believe, in-house ambulance. We run only ALS, so if you have a significant medical event where you need to be transported with significant issues, you may have a secondary ambulance that responds. But we run ALS, we bill people we use a private billing company, we bill people for their ride, and that money is actually a revenue source for the budget.
Okay, that was my, I knew it was, but we invoice at the market rate. I was
We
wondering
do,
how we did that, so
yeah.
you have a third party that
A
does it.
lot of it is
You
actually
bill
invoicing.
third-party insurance? and-
Yes, and we do a lot of invoicing of the government as well, for Medicare and Medicaid. So it's interesting. It's a big undertaking, which is why we typically outsource it. We have a really excellent EMT coordinator who does a lot of that work for us at the fire department, and really, because it's very complicated. Just the prescriptions, just outfitting the trucks is really a very complicated job. He does a great job. So that's not an easy one for us. Communities do it all different ways. Some communities actually have a reserve account that they put all the ambulance money into. We don't. We use it as a general revenue source.
Okay, and we know that comparable towns, we've looked at what they spend on ambulances with similar age groups. and-
Yes. I mean, I could tell you based on my last community, which ran the same number of ambulances and had almost the same number of firefighters, that we take in $400,000 a year more. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I saw that, yeah. So I think they do a really good job with the billing.
Should give them a call and tell them that.
I'll have
Maybe
to.
Maybe they'll buy an ambulance. Maybe
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
a 2-for-1.
As long as they don't take Lynn from me, we're good.
I just had a question about building maintenance. Seems like and maybe I'm over projecting, but does that, I assume that includes the schools?
Yes.
And for $350,000 a year, are we doing everything that we need to be doing to not have deferred maintenance throughout our buildings?
No. I mean, so we have a pretty comprehensive list that was created by Steve Foster for all of the buildings. And he's very good about making certain that the routine maintenance are getting done. But it's really routine maintenance, right? It's not going to be your big project. So if you need a major roof repair, it's not going to be through this, right? But it's going to be smaller roof repairs. For instance, we have a roof leak right now at Town Hall. That would pay for this infrareding of it and putting any poly we needed on it. New toilets, floor tiles that need to be replaced. That kind of thing would be through this budget. But like you'll see as you look down that, there may other times, for instance, replacing the concrete steps in the handicap ramp at the police station, which is a future year thing, would not be covered by that.
That seems to be a new thing this year. It says district-wide exterior maintenance renovations for $50,000.
So the schools did have some new initiatives this year that we were happy to be able to work with them on, that they, I think, in the past have had kind of fall through or were not able to fund. And I know Jim is here. If he wants to come up and talk about them, that would be fine with me. Okay with you? Okay. Sure, he can speak much more eloquently to his needs than I can.
So yeah, that one in particular is, as you were just talking about with regards to deferred maintenance, there are things that are somewhat cosmetic, but also don't rise to the same level as some others that we use the funds that we do have for deferred maintenance. So this $50,000 annually was meant to help us take care of those exterior issues that exist. You drive up to the school and you say, why are the stairs falling apart? Why that railing hasn't been replaced? Those kind of things each year. That's what that $50,000 is meant for.
Yeah, I don't object at all to it. It's actually, when you compare it to the municipal-wide renovation budget, Steve actually listed out all these big chunk items that total of $350. Yours seems to be more maintenance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Correct.
it's gotta be done. So it's either this way or another way, and that's why, I'm fine.
I mean, it actually, in the long run, I think provides a cost savings. If you take you properly maintain something, then you don't have a large capital expense in future years. So it's good practice. It's something, if we had more funds, we probably should do more of, but.
We were happy to be able to work together on.
I was going to say we were appreciative that we had started this with paving, where we had put in $200,000 a year to do around the district, all of our schools. Found in doing the high school, we only got half of that, so we had to bump that up and worked with the town manager. She bumped that up to $200,000, and we also included the exterior work, maintenance work as well. So it's working well.
I was hoping you could kind of walk us through the approach for facilities master plan too. So, we had this in the budget. We now are just going out to kind of engage a consultant to take care of this. What does this process look like, and what can we expect from a timing perspective?
Sure. So like I said, we just went out to bid. We've actually gone out twice because we didn't really get back what we wanted last time, and we think our budget might have been a little bit too low. So we went back out to bid. We had 2 good bids that we were happy with. We evaluated those so typically when we do an RFP or an RFQ, what happens is we have an evaluation committee. So the evaluation committee is Laurie Burzloff, Jim Maley, and Steve Foster. They evaluated the 3 bids. They are doing the interviews now, and they'll make a recommendation to me on which one to award to. And then we'll open the price proposals. And so once we have that, we'll sign a contract and get them moving. It's actually a very quick process. We've asked them to try to have a preliminary plan to us by town meeting so that we can start talking about it. It's not going to give us construction documents for any of the projects, right? It's going to give us really schematics. They're talking about what the projects look like, what needs to be done. They'll walk through the buildings. They'll make a determination on what our needs are, working with us, of course. And then they will give us price estimates, cost estimates for all those projects. They'll put them into a cost estimate matrix for us. And then they will, of course, apply the inflation factor like we've asked them to. So it will be, I think, a very quick process. It will be a public process. So once we do this initial work with them, the plan is to have public meetings to talk about what this will look like going forward. We have made a slight change to what you voted at town meeting. So at town meeting, it was Fire Station 2 and 3 schools. We've actually decided to include the middle school as well. So I don't know if you saw, but the middle school did not get MSBA funding this year again. We've always, and the way I look at things is you really have to include everything in your bucket, right? So even if we did get MSBA funding, it's still going to cost the town money. We're still going to have to do a bond for the project, right? So I think it should be included in this analysis. We should be talking about it as part of our master plan. So we worked together and decided that we would include it, which is great, and we have. So that is a new kind of aspect of it. So what they'll do is they'll evaluate the needs, they'll talk with the schools and with us about what we think we need, what our buildings look like, what our priorities are. It'll put that all together in a comprehensive plan. We'll get feedback on that plan and then bring it forward.
What's the timeline on that?
So we're asking them to have it to us. We originally had asked for it in July. But I guess based on the conversations they had today or yesterday during their interview, the person that they interviewed yesterday said that he thought he could have a product or a preliminary product to us by town meeting. Yeah. Yeah. And the person so we haven't awarded anything yet, and Jim was in these interviews, the person that they interviewed yesterday had vast school experience, which based on the content of this master plan with only being 1 town facility and fire department stations are really unique. I think that we're really excited about the 2 bidders because they both have vast school experience, which I think we need in this instance. So we're excited about it.
For all of the projects or just the middle school?
So the majority of the projects in the facility master plan 2 are educational based. Yeah. So.
Great, thank you.
That was really helpful.
No problem. Happy to. We're excited about it. I think it's a really good planning tool. I haven't seen it used in this way anywhere else, and I think it's really impressive the way that the planning has been done here. So we're excited to build on that.
And so what kind of recommendations, so that they basically evaluate just those buildings that you provide them?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
That's all we've asked them to do. Because we really, it's been an aggressive plan thus far, building-wise, in a really positive way, and we've managed to accomplish a lot. But that was really, other than the early education center, town-based, right? And so I think that there's a lot of school priorities that need to be addressed as well, building-wise. And so we're excited to move on and help with that.
That's great.
I guess I'm just curious about this. With the addition of the middle school to it, is the plan going to be to evaluate sort of all of the options on the table with the middle school? I mean, I know that there was certainly a plan that was in place and that was presented to, I'm gonna get the letters wrong, and that plan, you said, has just been rejected again or not funded. Is the bid that you're getting gonna be just to fund that particular plan, or is it gonna be tell us what the different options are and what it would cost?
So just in my discussions with the superintendent, everything is on the table. We want to figure out what the most cost-effective and practical, but also beneficial way to do this is. So, is it the addition at the middle school? Maybe, but it also may not be. And there may be other initiatives and other buildings that we can address that would help. And so we're looking at everything.
I have a general question. Maybe that's completely, inappropriate, and I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna get shot. I'm gonna get shot in a minute. It's good that I still have a German passport, so I can run.
I can't wait to hear it now.
Really built it up.
Have you ever thought, or other towns, that they sell their school building and have some private company build that school, and then you rent it and lease it back?
So you can't do it anymore. So it used to
Oh,
be
you
back
can't?
but back in the day you could. And people did it all the time. They would basically give a developer a spec, and they would say, this is what I'm looking for in a building, and the developer would build it, and then they'd buy it. There was a case maybe 7 or 8 years ago involving UMass in a dormitory where they did just that. They were like, we're looking for this dorm, wink, wink, and they built the dorm, and then they went out to bid, and they said, ooh, look at that, it's right here on our campus, and then they bought it, and the IG said that that was trying to get around prevailing wage. So they don't allow us to do it anymore. And it would be so much cheaper, unfortunately. But the only way a town can build without prevailing wage is if the funds are donated. So if anyone's out there and would like to donate to middle school, that would be great. We could do it without prevailing wage, but other than that, we're
Anybody
kind of
wealthy?
stuck. Yeah. So, yeah.
True for all the buildings or just for the school?
You don't need prevailing wage, oh, I'm sorry. Tom.
If it's donated funds, you don't need prevailing wage.
So what if,
Yeah.
so if it's funds, if the funds are raised privately and then donated,
You
it's
don't
still.
need
You
to.
have to
Yeah.
be 100%
It's
private
waiting
pay?
for me outside.
So yes, any funds that are publicly donated, so for instance, I built a makerspace that was privately donated, and I was able to do it without using prevailing wage. But I've had like wings donated, and like that part I could do without using prevailing wage, and other parts I could do had
How
me
would you
use
do that
it.
in a large
It's
construction project?
impossible because basically I'd have to like get 2 construction forces working at once, and that usually costs more money.
Because we had a roof, I remember from a while ago for a fire, for our firehouse, I mean, like the one in downtown, near the common, they needed a new roof and it was gonna be donated.
Mm.
The actual construction of the roof, they were like, we'll do this for no cost labor, and so I'm like, why couldn't it get,
Yeah,
do you remember, does anybody else remember that? No?
that's funny. But yeah, no, if it's
It
donated,
was
you
a
don't have
long
to use
time
it.
ago, but.
Yeah.
So your bids all come in at the same price? I mean, everybody knows the
Thank you.
wage that gets calculated in the bid.
It
And
doesn't,
cement
it
costs what
doesn't.
cement costs.
I
I
mean,
mean, they all within 5%
yeah.
of each other?
No.
No, it can be strangely, vastly different and confusing as to why they come in, and sometimes it will frustrate me because things will be like pennied. Obviously a catch basin doesn't cost a penny, but they'll put a penny on that, but something else will be way more. It's very difficult to figure out the rhyme of reason of construction bids, to be honest with you. But I've seen vast differences in them. So a lot of the time you'll get a really good price because someone's trying to get into that business, right? So getting into municipal sector is really a specialty. Yeah.
Do you just look at the price at the time of bids, or what are the parameters that you look at, and what is the main deciding factor?
Yeah, so we draft bid specifications that require certain qualifications. So typically, if I'm doing, for instance, if we were building a fire station, we would write into the bid qualifications that you've had to have built 4 other fire stations, or that you had to have been in the municipal business for 12 years, because we really don't want people who have never built our buildings before. It's not a great practice because, we're special in a lot of what we do, right? So you don't want someone who's never built a jail cell to be building your jail cell, right?
Everybody will get out.
Right. So, we set a lot of qualifications in our bid documents first. It's interesting.
Does anyone else have any questions? So I think if it's okay with you guys, I am going to allow for public comment while you're still here, just so you don't have to stay. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, we can have public comment at the end as well, but that's mostly old business and some housekeeping stuff, so come on up.
Bill Callaghan, 23 Lyman Road. North Andover, thanks for having me. I just had a couple questions on the 5-year forecast.
Sure.
So I went back to last year's budget book, and I looked back at FY 17, 18, and 19 actual. And then when you look at that, you can see, you know, kind of net, total revenue minus expenses returned to the general fund over the past 3 years. 2.7 in FY 17, 2.9 in FY 18, 4.5 in FY 19. And I know there might be some one-time things like the health insurance trust fund or something that's winding down, or every once in a while you just get lucky. But you know, even when I look to FY 20, which you know we're halfway through this year, we're showing a projected surplus of $120,000. And so it seems like, you know, I agree that the forecasting tool is very important and it provides an incredibly important discipline to this entire process. I just wonder if, you know, by kind of being so conservative, if we're foreclosing some discussions that could be useful to the town. Because I sat through the 5-year forecast meetings and they always look the same. It always looked like we're just barely going to make it next year, and 3 years from now, you know, we better hope for something to, you know, extra state aid or something like that. But it works out. And I realize that's been the business cycle, you know, 100%. So that's something I'd like to hear, you know, I think would be useful for discussion. And then I wanted to say too, on the construction cost side, just as that's my world, that's what I do in facilities maintenance. The inflation on the construction side is not just like a small factor. It's really that everybody is so busy that, you know, you just can't get crews, and we just see it all over the place. So like, you know, year over year, 20% inflation on very similar projects in kind of the industry that I work into, which is probably more competitive because it's straight commercial office, which is fairly, you know, very easy to predict and doesn't have the same complexity. So on that side, I definitely wanted to say that.
pain?
Yes, yes. So.
Melissa, do you want to address, what have you done in your experience elsewhere, maybe, or
Turnbacks or for forecasting?
for forecasting, I think?
This is in line to what I would typically see. It's always going to be conservative because anything can change, right? And we would, so a great for instance is excise, right? We've seen in the last few years excise increasing, and we may see 1 year where we see excise really increase, like a really good booming year for the economy. A lot of people are going to buy cars. But as soon as we see either any type of recession or even an odd cycle, we may see a really big decrease in excise. And so we always make sure that we are very cautious in our funding of excise. And so, you know, I think we are cautious. I think we do budget in a conservative manner, but I would never suggest doing it in any other way, because that's really how you would get yourself in kind of a pretty significant amount of trouble. I actually think that some of our forecast, like our state aid number, is pretty aggressive. You know, in the past, I've actually always forecasted 0 for state aid. We're forecasting 3%, I think that's pretty aggressive, especially because the new law for student funding is changing, right? And we really don't know what that's going to look like. What's going to get funded, what's not going to get funded, how does the formula change for North Andover? And so, you know, I think that is actually relatively aggressive. I think that our expense forecast is probably fairly on point because we do have most of our contracts negotiated, and health insurance historically has been pretty much where we've put it moving forward, and the pension is pretty much known, so I'm pretty comfortable with those. But you know, it's supposed to be a cautious, conservative estimate when it comes to this. As far as the turnbacks, not being here, I can't really speak to it. A lot of the time, it may be health insurance, but maybe because some people went off or we didn't have positions filled during the year. And, you know, there's a lot of different anomalies that happen within the budget. I don't know if you have any ideas
and I
more.
think, you know, to the point of the turnbacks, it's not necessarily turnbacks on expenditures. And the excess revenue could be something that is a one-time revenue that came in that was unexpected. We didn't know. We might have got FEMA money from a previous year. For FY19, I can tell you why we had such a large turnback is there were many combinations of things. We had some bigger fees come in for planning and building and things like that. But you also gotta consider we had the Columbia gas issue. Not every department got to spend every bit of the money they had on the things that they needed to do because we were all focused on the Columbia gas for a year. So that budget was an anomaly that all of the budgets didn't get spent as well. So you gotta look at the whole picture. I know the numbers look big as far as the turnbacks, but what makes up those numbers? Is it
Yeah.
one-time revenue that came in, things like that? Because we do occasionally have some fairly large one-time
Right.
fees come in, and it's not sustainable year after year because it's a one-time fee.
So, I mean, just one thing that jumped out at me when I looked at it was, for health insurance for FY '20, we're showing 12.3, prior year was 9.6. So that's a pretty significant,
For actual, you mean, right?
for actual, right? And so so that obviously seems like where the money is, I mean, and that's, I guess that is, right? We're all sort
So-
of, you know,
Can I answer that?
Yeah, of
one,
course,
too?
go ahead.
Okay, so if you recall, when we moved to the GIC, it was projected out that from that move to the GIC, we were gonna have some substantial savings. And that savings, we wanted to spread out over 10, 12-year period in order to help us sustain a budget and increases each year. So keeping the budget at a lower increase every year versus if we were self-insured, that number would be a lot bigger, right? So we are spreading the savings out over the years and getting 10, maybe 15 years out of it by the looks of it, to help us in situations like if we have a bad snow year. Where's that, rather than put the burden on the taxpayers to raise it on the recap, we've built in our savings so that we can help support that and cover it. And if it's a year that we don't have a bad snow, it falls to the bottom line. So we don't take that money and just spend it,
Right.
we turn it back. So it helps to keep and sustain the budgets that we have moving forward without putting such large increases in our budgets that we can't sustain when that savings goes away, because it's gonna go away at some point. It's gonna build up to the point where our insurance is going to be that level,
that's excellent.
okay?
My turn. Stan Lippert, 43 Stonecliff Road. I just have a simple question. When did we buy our last ladder truck? I don't remember.
I would say,
15 years ago.
Yeah.
Such an average.
yeah,
Is that what it
it's been a
said?
long
Gosh,
time ago.
No, it can't be 15 years ago, because
No,
I
I
wasn't
would
paying
say-
attention. It was like,
It was a while ago, I know that.
could have been 10, but it wasn't 15. I
Yeah.
know that. Because I remember, I sat in those
It was better than
discussions.
package, it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I don't know the specific
Is
year
this,
it was.
is this a replacement ladder or a new ladder?
It's gonna be replaced. We wouldn't, we don't, yeah, we wouldn't
Okay.
be adding to the fleet.
Okay. Because,
We're replacing the pumper, right?
oh, is this a pumper or a
I think
ladder?
this year is a pumper.
Oh, okay,
The ladder goes
okay.
further out.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, further
But
out,
that's
further out.
okay. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it does get me started.
No
I'm gonna
pun
start talking
intended
about
on that.
folders, Yeah,
Yeah. No,
I'm
no,
very
okay,
excited.
that makes sense.
But yeah, I
Bec-
think. is this
Because we
year?
bought both of those at the same time. Didn't we
Yeah.
buy a pumper and a ladder at the same time?
Within years of each
Yeah,
other.
yeah, a year,
Yep.
a year or so.
The
right,
pumper
yeah,
is a
yeah.
2004 that we're replacing. Let's see what the ladder is. I don't know if I have the ladder. Yeah, I don't know if it doesn't say what year it is. I don't think. I don't think it says what year it is.
So we're replacing the ranges of truck.
Okay, I'm good.
Yeah. You good? That was
Yeah,
it?
yeah, I'm good. I wouldn't know, I was just curious, because I
Sorry,
ass-
it says in FY '24 will be approaching 15 years of age.
Right.
Current ladder truck.
so that's, so it's like
12 years.
10 or 11 now. Yeah, yeah.
It was a 2011
Okay,
ladder truck.
okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. We do turn them in and then we get, reimbursed for them
Yeah,
typically.
trade-
Yeah,
trade-in
trade,
value.
couldn't get that out, but yes, thank you, a trade-in
Yeah.
value on them. We do, a smaller community will buy it, from like, like the Hudson Resort.
curb and the metal.
Yeah, we do, yeah. Right. Try parking that in your driveway, yeah.
A little sign that says, "Take me." You are very funny.
Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming. Any other, I think we're kind of exhausted all of our questions for now.
I really appreciate the time getting to meet you all. I'm looking
great.
forward to the budget, and if there's any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you so much for coming.
I'll be here for your next meeting. Help you set up your IT too.
Appreciate it.
Yay.
Okay, so we'll move on. I would just ask Jen to give us a quick recap of the Stevens Estate Advisory Committee, kind of where they stand and just
Sure.
what's going on.
Sure, so the committee has met now 3 times. We're sort of on a schedule of meeting about every 2 weeks. We are in the process of doing a lot of information gathering right now, and so there have been some initial meetings that at each meeting we've sort of had someone come in and speak to us. We've had a presentation that I unfortunately missed because I had a conflict about all of the facility improvements that are needed across the estate at all of the various buildings. We also had a presentation at our meeting last night from Joanna, who is the head of the estate, who sort of talked to us about what the model is now and what's working and what challenges she's facing, sort of where she thinks the current model could get them. We are also planning a pretty aggressive public outreach to try to gather information and feedback from as many people in the town as possible about what folks would like to see happen with the estate so that we can take that into consideration. Other things that we're working on are talking with outside agencies such as the trustees of reservations to see if there is an option there, and to understand what a partnership with the trustees might look like, and if that is a viable option or what that option would be. We are also talking about identifying a few similar facilities similar to the estate that are publicly owned and reaching out to those folks to figure out, like, is it working? And if it is working, how and why and what's different? Like, do you have a massive endowment that we don't have for the estate? Like, what is it that's working? Because there's clearly some serious issues with the current model. So we're working through all of those things, and sort of at each meeting we've been tackling a different aspect of it. Keep your eyes open. We're hoping to put flyers out in the library, the senior center, push on social media following our next meeting, sort of a survey, and then also an open-ended way for people to submit comments or feedback to us, just to get that engagement with folks. So we're just still in the process of gathering all the information, trying to understand it. I think our next meeting is in 3 weeks because there's a holiday, but the idea is hopefully to get someone from the trustees in soon to come and talk to us so that we can explore that more.
Is there an overall schedule? So, I mean, we want to be at a certain milestone at that point, or it's just?
I mean, I think the original idea was that we would have some sort of recommendation to provide at town meeting. Well, I think the original idea was that there would be some sort of recommendation that would be provided before the budget process, but because the committee didn't actually get put together and start meeting until December, there's no way that's gonna happen. I think we have not been asked by the Board of Selectmen to commit to a recommendation at any particular date, but I think all of us are working very expeditiously and meeting frequently and doing work outside of the committee and bringing it back with the idea that hopefully we'll have some sort of recommendation or report out by town meeting.
I was at the first meeting. That was kind of the impression I got, that at this point, the committee was formed late. They weren't sure what they could accomplish, but they were gonna work as hard as they could to accomplish as much as possible before town meeting. And the goal is to try to have a recommendation, but that may not be feasible given the really short timeline is kind of what I gathered. The goal is to do that, but that was not, I think, a goal that was given by the Board of Selectmen at this point.
I think that's right. I think that's what we're all hoping for, and I think there are many of us working on sort of our own tracks and gathering information and bringing it back to the meeting with the hope of speeding the process along.
Thank you.
So.
Appreciate it. Let's see, what else do we have? Old business. Just to touch on the topic of non-disclosure agreements, I did send out an email to the committee. We did hear from the town manager regarding our inquiry whether or not North Andover utilizes non-disclosure agreements. And she was able to tell us that there have been 3 non-disclosure agreements signed in the last 3 years. Above and beyond that, because of the nature of those agreements, there's not much information that we are allowed at this point, to discuss. So we can continue to have a conversation around that issue, but I wanted to present that information to you. And we can think about that and then go from there. All right, any other old business? Next, just so everyone knows, next meeting, we are going to have a presentation from the superintendent and assistant superintendent regarding the school's operating budget, which I think will be phenomenal. So just be prepared for that. They're presenting this week to the school committee, so we'll hear after that. All right, let's review minutes, and I think we'll. They're long minutes.
Just FYI on the Stevens estate, I don't know if you know that the Community Preservation Committee paid for a capital needs assessment for the Stevens estate like 3 or 4 years ago, which I've asked as a member of the CPC to have a copy of, but I haven't yet gotten a copy of it, but I was hoping it had made its way to the committee.
Is it the 2013? Yes, it did. We received that. It should be, I think it's attached to the agenda for our meeting from last night, and if not, Andrew Shapiro has it, and he can get it to you pretty quickly. I may actually have it in my, hold on.
There's also something here in the capital book. I don't know how that got in there. Some,
Yeah, I saw that.
some from 2017, pointing out all the things that needs to be done. I don't know why that got in there.
Because I think that there's the $350,000 for building maintenance per year. So I would assume
yeah.
that's why.
There's more now
Okay.
that needs to be
Do I
done.
have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor? Great. Anything else you guys would like to discuss before we adjourn? Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjournment?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you.